Welcome back again to Brown Neck Reviews, and I am that guy from Brown Neck Reviews. So the mid 80s to about the mid 90s was a very interesting time in RC car history. Um, there was a lot of racing going on, and racing was basically off-road racing. 1/10 off-road racing was gaining traction and getting really popular. And so if you were uh, a hobbyist or got an RC car around that time, more than likely you probably read RC Car Action magazine, and also you knew about a couple companies that were actual racing manufacturers because you probably ended up getting the racing bug. Some of those were very well known: Associated, Losi, Kyosho, and even to a lesser extent Tamiya. But one company that wasn't as well known, or as well, two of them. There was Schumacher, and then there was also Yokomo. Okay, um, so I want to talk about Yokomo a little bit before going into the 870C that we have here. So Yokomo was basically started by a guy named Tomoaki Tom Yokobori. All right, and growing up, he made models just like any other child would of models of warships and airplanes, that kind of thing, plastic models. Because back then, of course, there was no YouTube, there was no computer gaming, and video gaming was still a niche kind of thing. More for computer nerds like me and 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 geeks, basically, right? So it wasn't popular like it is now. And we we were into other things too, besides sitting in front of a screen and playing video games. And one of those things was RC cars. And so, you know, and also model building if you were a hobbyist, or model airplanes. But anyway, Mr. Yokobori was into these model aircraft and model warships and everything, and that was his thing, right? Um, However, his father was a very strict, I guess, education enthusiast, probably a teacher or something. All right, but Mr. Yokobori, Tom, was more interested in hobby stuff, and I guess he was watching some people in Japan across the Arakawa River, as it says in Wikipedia, and he got interested in radio control aircraft. Okay, just like any other kid would, because radio control back then was not a a mainstream thing. There was no Amazon where you could buy cheap radio control models and give them for Christmas. Most of the stuff that we had were either non-powered or pull back motorized things that just basically went in a straight line. They weren't controlled by anything except maybe you were lucky enough to get one that had a wire attached to your car. All right. So we saw these airplanes and he was like, "Wow, that's pretty awesome." But again, his dad is this strict education guy. And he he ended up Tom Yokobori ended up using the money that he was supposed to use for what's called cram school. All right. Cram school is a school where you go, like in these countries, like in Asia, to cram basically for an examination test or something. So you go to these schools, to do that kind of thing. All right. And they're basically really short, but really intense programs. So he took this tuition money that his dad gave him for cram school and used it to buy a model airplane, remote control model airplane. Um, so I can imagine how that conversation went in the Yokobori household, because he didn't really care for anything else. All right. So Yokobori was also a student that attended the United States Army officer, or attended a home of a United States Army officer to learn English, all right, for his conversation skills. So anyway, after high school, he didn't go to college, all right? Even though his dad was probably like, hey, you need to go to college, you need to do this so you can become a successful businessman or whatever, right? He was like, no, I'm not going to do that. And instead, he started doing a mail order scale model retail business. And that business actually started thriving. And he started actually a bunch of stores in metropolitan areas within Japan. All right. He got a little help from his sister, who was good with English and logistics with overseas companies. And so his business grew. All right. His parents at this time were running a confectionery material business. And then I guess his parents, when they saw that he was being successful with this thing, decided to help him out. And then, he made his own store, Yokobori Model Shop. All right. So in 1970, he so it wasn't called Yokomo yet. So in 1970, they became involved with Team Associated. All right, where they imported the Team Associated RC1. Okay, and they would sell this car with basically all the hop-ups for the RC1. All right, because hobbies in Japan are really, really big. I mean, these guys take it super, super seriously. All right. And that partnership with Associated still continues even today. And you'll see it, I think the first time where it was really publicly seen was with this, which was the YZ-10, which was a Yokomo product that was used by Team Associated team drivers to compete in the four-wheel drive class of 110. Because even though they had the RC-10, they didn't have a four-wheel drive associated car. Now, Eustace Moore came up with a conversion kit for the RC-10 to convert it to what's now called the 410 Legend. And that was a belt-driven, I think, but originally he had a what was it called? A cable-driven version, and then it became a belt-drive version. But Mr. Yokobori, and Associated, they were in partnership since that time with the RC1. So let's see. So that's him right there in the middle. All right, and you'll see him, Mr. Yokobori. I'm sure. I think that's a more recent picture of him today. And you can see the Yokomo symbols on there and everything. So anyway, in in 19, I think it was 1974, he branched out to a another company called Mitsuboshi, all right, which was a store in Nihonbashi, which was basically the first radio controlled specialty store that was in a department store. All right, kind of like something that you would see like having a Verizon store in a Target or something like that, right? So that business grew like twofold. I mean, it grew like crazy, and then so they opened another store in Ginza, and then started doing RC car production in 1977. All right, when they built a ready to run version of the Cox 049 Dune buggy. All right, and Cox is another one of those companies that not a lot of people know about, but it was a pretty major player and affected a lot of what we have today. All right. And so he basically introduced the radio controlled hobby into Japan. So in, I think it was 1977, they then renamed the company to Yokomo. All right, which is you know a put together version of his last name Yokobori and Mokei, which means model in Japan. So basically Yokobori model Yokomo. All right, and that is the let me see here. This is their logo that they had originally came up with. And an interesting thing about the logo, all right, it was kind of to have the silhouette of the Can-Am cars at that time, because RC cars during that time, they wanted to replicate real cars. And so, having a logo like that had a silhouette of a Can-Am car, all right, this is a Can-Am Porsche from the 70s. And you can see how the logo kind of fits that silhouette. All right. So just a little fun fact for you. All right. And then in 1979, they offered the associated RC12E. And, well, actually, that one was the one that came with all the optional parts. And then that was basically the one that the version that Yokomo sold. And then in 1983, all right, that's when basically the 1/10 off-road scene for Yokomo basically opened up. All right. So 1983, they released the YZ-834B, all right, which is so at the time I think Tamiya had the Hot Shot, but Yokomo came out with this 834B, and it was a almost ready to run version or 4-wheel drive 1/10 RC car. Okay. And that was called the Dog Fighter. All right. Um, that car basically was imported to different parts of the world. I think Grobner imported it as the Dog Fighter. But more importantly, I think in 1985, that car was the car that was the first IFMAR 4-wheel drive 1/10 champion chassis. And that was piloted by Gil Losi Jr. And you can see in the pics right here, with the 834B. All right. Gil Losi, basically the first world champion for 1/10 4-wheel drive off-road, and the Yokomo 834B as the first world champion 1/10 4-wheel drive RC car. All right. There's a better picture of it right there. Now, the car that Gil Losi used in that race was modified, and you can see on the rear end there that you have the shocks on the side over there. Originally, the 834B only had a monoshock on the rear, front and rear. All right. It had that same setup on the front, but also a monoshock on the rear, which was hidden by the body. Okay. But yeah, the 834B was the first world champion, and a lot of people really didn't know about it. It was called here, I think it was called the RPS Special, which was marketed by Losi. So Yokomo at that time even had a partnership with Losi at that time to import their 834B to the ranch pit shop, and they called that the RPS Special 834B. All right. The car I don't think was too successful, and but that's okay. You know, they eventually came up with the other car, which we will be talking about later on. All right. So what replaced that car was what we have here, the 870C. All right. So this one is a modified version of that car, of that chassis. Okay, this is something I got on eBay, but it came with this body. All right. So it was kind of a strange looking body. Okay. And it eventually was imported into US by Associated. Okay, so there's your Yokomo and Associated partnership to the YZ-10. Right, basically the same car, but with a different body on there. You know, and you can see the contrast in the bodies right here. All right. So the 834B or the 870C was co-developed by the guy that you see there, Masami Hirosaka. Basically, I think if there was anybody that I associate Yokomo with, it's that guy, Masami Hirosaka. He helped develop this car, which is the 870C, which is arguably probably the most successful four-wheel drive chassis in 1/10 off-road racing history. Masami Hirosaka was a legend, basically, in his own right. He won his first world championship, I think, in 1987, four-wheel drive championship with the Schumacher Cat. Okay, but shortly after, he got a job with Yokomo, and this is basically what they came up with. All right. So that brings us to today, and let's talk about it. All right, so let's look at the 870C chassis. Now, this is a re-release 870C, also produced by Yokomo. And you can see that it looks kind of sparse because this car was basically designed for racers by a racer. Masami Hirosaka, and I think his father, Masaki, probably had a lot of influence with the chassis design because his father, Masaki, was the one that actually wrenched on Masami Hirosaka's cars. All right. So you'll see a lot of things that are in here. A lot of the front, rear, and center gearboxes are easy to get to. All right. I don't think it originally came with this top plate. I think that was added on later by racers, but the cover for the gearbox for the front is held in by 4 screws, basically. You just take out those 4 screws and you pop the top, and then you have access to your ball differential on the front, which is what they originally came with, which is ball diffs, front and rear. And I think the center on this car was a one-way hub for the front drive belt. All right. And you can see how low everything is on the chassis. You had cutouts on both sides, basically for the batteries, because at that time, everybody ran NICAD cells. LiPo had not yet been invented or widely used. And so everybody ran basically Sanyo NICAD cells in a 6-cell configuration. And this one is configured so you ran 4 cells on one side and then 2 cells on the other side. Okay. Then you have your dual belt crank system on the front, as well as I think they had universals on the front axles right there. All right. So very, very sparse but very effective design for racing and also for any kind of maintenance, because when you're at the track, all right, and you need to work on your car, you don't want to have to take apart basically the whole car to get it one part, all right? Because sometimes you wanted to, I don't know, change out the ball diffs or whatnot, and this design made it very easy to do that. Now, the Optima Mid was also another car that was competing with this, as well as the Schumacher Cat. And their drivetrains, especially for the belts, were sealed up. And you can see here that the belt is not sealed. And that's because they had an under tray, all right, that was supposed to keep the dirt out. And the thinking was that because it's open like this, the dirt will just basically fly out, and get out of the way of the belt, as well as the motor mount with the gear. There's no cover on here, all right? It was just exposed like that. So it's easy to get to, easy to maintain, easy to work on, especially in a racing environment where you don't have a lot of time to take apart the car and make a lot of changes. Okay. The front and rear bulkheads and the center originally on the 870C were made from magnesium. And that's for lighter weight, and to save on weight and also to have strength. And then you can see here they have a unique wheel mounting system. Okay. So the wheels were basically screwed on to a hub, all right, which was basically a solid hub on the wheel. All right. It was a square shape right there. And that went to your, your steering, I don't know, uprights, I think is what they're called. And you can see all of the turnbuckles are also adjustable. Shocks, of course, are oil-filled adjustable shocks, and then you have multiple mounting positions for the shocks on both ends. All right, and that's so that you could adjust to different track surfaces, as well as a stabilizer for the rear. All right. Sometimes people would run those, sometimes they would not, depending on the track condition or the track surface. And Masami Hirosaka basically won with this car in its first world championship in, I think, 1987. And after that, he basically kept on winning, in 89 and all of the IFMAR world championships. This was basically the car that dominated that series of races. All right, and then going towards the rear of the car, you'll see that they use these wire wing mounts. All right, just because, again, wire wing mounts are just easier and lighter than having to have a molded plastic piece to put on there, which eventually changed later on as tracks became more and more groomed and more high traction. But this was basically the design format for the YZ-10, and this layout basically carried on up until about the mid 90s when they switched it up to I don't know if they did the shaft drive at that point, but at this time belts were the hot thing, and that's what they were using. The servo mount here, I'm not sure if it originally had a mount like this. A lot of racers during that time, regardless of the car that you were running, were basically putting their servos on with servo tape. But it's nice that the Riri has that. So the original one, I think, also came with an FRP chassis. I don't think it was carbon fiber yet. That was what the aftermarket people had to come up with. So that's this. This is the 870C re-release version, and I have one that I got on eBay, which would kind of show what your typical racers would have done to it. All right. So this chassis right here on this one is this is an aftermarket chassis, and the chassis itself, the layout is based off of Masami's, I think, 89 or 87 winning, IFMAR winning chassis that he used. So you can see that he had everything was closer in line, as well as the batteries would be a 4-2 configuration right here, and the 2 would be longitudinal to the belt. And the chassis was actually also a little bit longer, the chassis that Masami used to win the world championships. He did have the same gearboxes. These are actually aftermarket gearboxes, because I think these came off of a YR4 touring car. But this one has the one way, and so one way meaning that when you when it goes forward, all right, the front wheels will not brake. So your braking force is all on the rear instead of on all four wheels. Okay, but this one also has the ball diffs. The re-release has gear diffs front and rear, and does not have the one-way center. All right, and you can see here that the previous owner of this had also locked the spur gear on there, for I guess so it doesn't slip at all. But this would have been maybe a typical configuration that you would have seen during that time for the 870C. All right. So the 870C was a very, very influential car in Yokomo, and not just with Yokomo, but with RC racing in general. The format that this car had was run on different cars ever since that time, where you have your dual shock setup on the front, dual shock setup on the rear, independent suspension, and then of course your stabilizers, as well as the one way, which some people ran, some people didn't. But those things all added up basically made it one of probably the most competitive four-wheel drive RC buggy of all time. It spawned several iterations from this, but the original configuration still basically stayed the same. They moved I think the front shock tower in front of the bulkhead at one point. Some people ran shorter shocks. This one has shorter shocks on it that the previous owner had run, as well as gear diffs and ball diffs. The wheels, I think, were the one point that I don't know. I was never really into these screw-on wheels with the hubs. So the standard now is basically a 12 millimeter hex. But Masami won with this car, I think, for 10 years, I think, or was it? No, not 10 years, but 10 world championships with this car. And it affected the design of a lot of four-wheel drive buggies going forward. Now, there were some major changes later on, probably around the early 2000s, when tracks started getting groomed and really, really high traction. But as far as a historical piece, I think the 870C is one of those that's sometimes overlooked by a lot of people, but people that know usually want these things, greatly. Now, Masami Hirosaka, though he was with Yokomo for so long, he just recently joined Team Associated. And, I don't feel so bad, because Associated and Yokomo have been basically partners since the 70s, before RC buggy racing was even a thing. And so, it's not surprising to me. because Masami actually ran Associated Cars. During that time, he ran an RC10 that he dominated with also for a long time. And I think Yokomo Tomoaki Yoko, well, whoever the owner of Yokomo was, he just retired recently, so they got a new CEO. But you know, these cars bring you back to that time, and especially the 870C or YZ-10, because it was a major player in the competition off-road scene for such a long time. But with that, that's all I got for you today. Thank you for watching. And if you liked it, then leave a like. If you didn't like it, then hit the unlike button twice because you hated it so much. And with that, that's all I got for you today. So God bless you. God bless America. And God bless the troops. Amen.